What's up everybody, Wince here with another Borderlands 4 video. So the other day I was farming for my Deadeye firmware for a build and realized that firmware drops were pretty low, and I decided to then take the time to test out what the actual drop rates were. So I ran 50 rounds of the Meathead Riders drill sight on Ultimate Vault Hunter Mode 5 and then 50 rounds on Easy. I mainly did that one because I wanted also to have the Vladoff Lucian AR legendary rifle, so that was just made sense to try to knock out two birds with one stone. The results really aren't too surprising if you've been playing for a while, but it's really scary if you're tracking certain or targeting certain firmware, so stick around. I'm going to go over my data and then I'll go over the results at the end. So if you're looking just for specifics on the results, go ahead and skip to the end, but otherwise let's get started. After my first day of farming, I kind of made the assumption firmware drops were going to be somewhat similar in drop rate to legendaries. I was completely wrong about that, but I wasn't far off when it comes to the percentage of getting the specific one you want. I also assumed that because I was on Ultimate Vault Hunter Mode 5, I'd be getting more purples, which meant I'd get more firmware because it's better quality loot. That appears to not be the case, and we'll talk about that in the data as well. And then the only problem I have with the data that I collected is I never intended to go from Ultimate Vault Hunter Mode 5 to Easy Mode. I really never intended on making this a video. It was just more for my own thought process on what I was doing. The problem is that I didn't track the total number of white drops that dropped during the runs, but I did track the number of commons that had firmware on them. Because it was so minimal when I was testing Ultimate Vault Hunter Mode 5, I just didn't think to count all the white drops in particular, and they were blending in with the ammo drops, but we'll go over more on that later. Before we get started, here's a picture on the screen of my Excel sheet that I use. You can see I tracked all the total number of drops I got, tracked them by color, and then I tracked which specific firmware piece I was getting. Say Deadeye, I was tracking those. There was no correlation between the type of firmware that was dropping and the color it was on. There was no correlation with Ultimate Vault Hunter Mode and Easy, so I'm not going to go over that, just showing you here that I did track that. So first, from my data on Ultimate Vault Hunter Mode 5, I had a total of 150 greens, 197 blues, 272 purples, and 10 legendary drops for a total of 629 drops through the entire 50 rounds. This comes out to percentage-wise is 23.85 green, 31.32 blue, 43.24 purple, and 1.59% legendaries. So I do want to stop here and say, like, if you're farming for legendaries and you've seen people say, well, legendaries have a 5% drop rate, I would not say that this goes against that in any way, shape, or form. I would just note that when people are saying 5% drop, they are specifically farming single target bosses, where in this case I'm targeting 2 bosses and all the mobs that are involved, and I counted all the loot for all of it combined. So this would be one full drill site encounter rather than one single boss fight encounter. So that 5% legendaries I think is probably still true. It just gets washed out when you have to add in all the total number of loot here. Through these runs, I had a total of 73 firmware drops, which were 2 white, 11 green, 22 blue, 35 purple, 3 gold. Percentage-wise, that's 2.7, 15.1, 30.1, 47.9, and 4.1 respectively. On Easy Mode, I had a total of 184 greens, 240 blues, 263 purples, and 9 legendary drops in total for 696 drops through the entire counter. That came out to 26.4% green, 34.48% blue, 37.79% purple, 1.29% legendaries. On this, I had firmware drops for 9 whites, 14 greens, 35 blues, 21 purples, and 2 legendaries. The percentage-wise, that's 11% white, 17.2%, 43.2%, 25.9%, and 24.7% with their colors respectively. Alright, for my results, going back to my assumptions, one, I thought it was going to be a low drop rate similar to that of legendaries, and I thought it was going to be higher on purples than it was on any other, so I assumed that Ultimate Vault Hunter Mode 5 would just be a better choice than easy. But there have been many people who have been testing drop rates since this came out, and I've seen a few of them and saw that it really didn't matter which mode you were on for getting the best legendary drops. It only affected licensed part case or part system, which that seems to be the case as well with firmware. As far as the rarity of the drops goes, there wasn't much of a difference between whether I got more on purple versus blue. It really came down to what dropped the most, which rarity dropped the most. So in the case of Ultimate Vault Hunter mode, I had the most purples versus blues versus greens versus whites versus legendaries, whereas on easy mode I still had the most purples, but I had far more blues and then far more greens as well as far more whites, which made those percentages look higher in there. So it really comes down to just how much loot you're getting in there, and the type of rarity that you're getting the most is going to be the one that has the most firmware drops on it. Alright, on Ultimate Vault Hunter Mode 5, I had an 11.61% drop rate, and I had an 11.64% drop rate on easy mode. So if you're farming specifically for firmware, it's going to make sense to just grind the gear on easy. Same seems to be the case if you're doing it for legendaries. And then I would farm a drill site that you want one of their legendaries from, and then move drill site to drill site. There's no conclusive evidence that shows that certain pieces of firmware drop on different difficulties, which was a rumor I saw before the game came out, and I don't think that seems to be the case. The scary part about all of this is that, assuming that my ChatGPT work was correct, and if there's any mathematicians that can break this down better, please let me know. Let us all know in the comments. But if you're looking for a specific type, say you want the Deadeye firmware, which is what got me started on this journey, then you have an 11.6.1% chance of getting the firmware, but you have 21 different options of types. So that comes out to a 0.55% of getting the specific one that you want. And then I didn't factor this in because I didn't go far enough down the rabbit hole, but then you have to factor in that it needs to be on whichever specific piece of gear that you want to get it on, which will also lower the drop rate. So if you can, I would suggest moving gear around. Also, if you're watching this and you've just started getting firmware, you're just starting the game, you've just hit end game, if you have room in your bank, I would say start saving all your firmware, especially ones that you think you might want. Even if you think you've got multiple of the same ones, you think you still have the potential for 4 other characters, multiple different gear pieces that might need it. So go ahead and save the firmware you want. And also, if you don't have room in your bank, I would start making space and start saving these, because I feel like these are going to be harder to come by for specific drops than it will be to farm the legendary that you want from something. So in conclusion, there you have it. There's the firmware drops around 11.6% of the time. There's no difference between easy and ultimate Vault Hunter modes. Now I can go deeper into whether specific ones seem to drop more often. I definitely thought this was going to be the case when my first easy mode run had 4 god killers, but it ended up all evening out in the end. So if you're specifically farming for firmware or legendaries, then it's easier to just farm on easy. It's going to be quicker. Just if you're doing that, make sure to check your white gear, because it'll blend in. The firmware gear will blend in with the ammo drops, and just don't get confused. It caught me by surprise a couple times. And then let me know that one firmware that you've been chasing, or if my math was wrong in any step of the way. Like and subscribe for more Borderlands 4 content. See ya!